Hello Husker Nation, this is Trev Alberts, the Athletic Director here at the University of Nebraska, and it's my great privilege and honor to be sitting next to a College Football Hall of Famer and arguably the greatest coach in the history of college football. I know I'm biased, but Coach Osborne and our recently named head coach Matt Rhule. Thank you guys both for being here. This will be a fun conversation. I thought I had to start because I remember it was in Miami at the Orange Bowl. Coach, it was 1994, and I think you won your first national championship, and I had the privilege of watching that. I just thought I'd start this. What were you doing in 94?
I don't want to admit it right now. I was sitting at home rooting for Miami.
Well, why were you rooting for Miami?
Because we had just gone undefeated and beat Oregon, and or I can't remember about the impact of the days, what it was before or after, but yeah, we were hoping that we would be national champions.
And so on the day that Nebraska won its first national championship, you were a little disappointed. I thought that was a great story back in 1994. But I just thought it was interesting. One of the things that Coach Osborne I thought was so good at that we as players were taught is, the physicality of the game. And we took great pleasure in trying to be the most physical team on the field on Saturday. And I guess I just would like to hear from you, Coach, was that always part of what your thinking was? Did that sort of transition as part of your coaching? But I just remember, maybe it was just me, but it was drilled into our minds about the importance of being the most physical team. Where did that come from?
Well, partly just the geography of Nebraska, because you're going to end up playing 2-3 games. Snow isn't a big problem. Rain isn't a big problem usually, but you're going to have a wind, and it's going to be 30, 25 miles an hour. Now, the fortunate thing now is that the end zones are pretty much enclosed, but we used to play, and it was kind of like a wind tunnel, and nothing shuts down the passing game faster than a wind. And so I figured we could always run the ball. And I guess our experience with Oklahoma over the years, I remember one time they beat us out here. They did not throw a single pass, not one pass in the game, but they just kept the ball away from you, And they usually didn't have big runs, but it'd end up being 3rd and 2, and they'd make it. And so we tried to play the game in such a way that we were the dominant team in the fourth quarter. And sometimes those runs in the first quarter were 3 yards, and but they'd be 5 or 6 by the third quarter and fourth quarter. But we also try to make sure that everybody on the field was physically engaged. So we had a couple plays where our quarterback blocked. I wanted the rest of the team to look at those guys and say, they're football players. And our receivers, we probably spent more time working with them on blocking. And because, the runner breaks line of scrimmage, and so often receivers are looking to see, well, is he going to break or not? And then they go try to find somebody, and by then it's too late. So our receivers went every play, no matter what happened, and they were going to go down there and throw. And usually by the end of the game, defensive backs were pretty tired of that. So anyway, that's what we did, but that was just our approach.
So Matt, I remember when you and I were talking as part of the search, and you talked about the importance of physicality and how you believed in being a physical team. Of course, that was music to my ears. But how do you, in 2023, balance? Obviously, there's been a lot of health and safety in a good way that's come into our game. But how do you find a way to balance that with the health and safety of the players while still trying to develop a physical football team? How have you managed to balance that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, as Coach said, like watching those teams play and the receivers going down the field and throwing a low block at a defensive back. All those rules are outlawed. Or we've been watching a ton of old film and watching the option, watching the fullback, arc on a 18 option play or 19 option play and get to the go cut the safety. Can't do that anymore. So the rules have changed. But at its at its core, the game of football is about one man moving another man in the direction he doesn't want to go, or preventing a guy from going somewhere. So, I think they've made some good rule changes, but there's a lot that we're allowed to do. And so I think it's really about, we don't want to be non-intelligent. We don't want to ever put someone at harm's risk. But the only way, to me, that you can develop the callousing to be physical is to practice physical. And we don't want the fourth quarter, as Coach said, like games are won in the fourth quarter. You're never going to hear us say, like, hey, let's start fast. We want to, throw body blows and try to win the game at the end of the game. And to me, the guys can't say that, hey, the fourth quarter of the game is the hardest part of the week. They've got to do some hard things on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays so that they can have fun on game day.
One of the things I tell people all the time, Coach, obviously when people think about your career and the impact you had, not just on young people, but football itself and wins and losses. And I always tell everybody, on the surface, people say, well, Coach Osborne was a really smart person. That's absolutely true. Well, he really worked hard. He paid a bigger price than the other head coaches. 100% true. I think the thing that people often miss is your strategic thinking and your innovation. And I'm not sure people fully grasp and understand. And I think about things like strength and conditioning and life skills and the training table. Have you ever thought, even after you retired, have you ever thought at all about, if I was still coaching today, what are some areas of innovation that you thought you could see or potentially were coming in football that maybe if you were still coaching you would be employing? You ever thought about that?
Well, football continually evolves, as you know. And I was always a little bit envious that we had not understood the zone read. That was something I think Urban Meyer primarily brought on the scene. And it was a type of option football. And but I always felt that you learn more from your losses. When things are going well, when you're winning, well, you don't want to mess with it. You don't want to change. And so 1966, 67, we went 6-4. And we had won 4 conference championships before that, won 10 games or 11. And so the fans were restless. And so I brought Boyd Epley in to see Bob Devaney. Boyd was a pole vaulter. He got into muscle building, and he got big enough. At that time they used bamboo poles, and he was breaking the poles. So the track coach wasn't happy, and so I brought Boyd in because he kept telling me, he said, I think I can make your football team better. And Bob probably would not, a year or two before, I don't think he would have listened. Because in those days, weight training was not good for you. You couldn't comb your hair and it interfered with coordination. And so Bob didn't really much believe in it, but he was willing to take a chance. And so we initiated strength and conditioning. And Boyd was probably the first full-time strength coach at the major college level, at least. And so that was something that helped us. We were able to stay ahead of the curve a little bit, but now everybody's doing the same things, or a lot of the same things. But anyway, and I would say also we learned a lot from Oklahoma. And the thing that was interesting about Oklahoma, you'd sail along through 9 or 10 games, you'd win most of them, and then all of a sudden you're playing a team that you have 4 days to get ready for, and it's entirely different. You have to involve your safeties in the option game, or you're a man short. And so it was an entirely different defensive concept. So finally, toward the end, when we were playing them, we started practicing one period on Monday, on just the wishbone. And the last time we played them, I think we held them to under 200 yards and 3 points. But I think any time you can do something well and execute well, and it's not something everybody sees every week, it's really to your advantage. And So right now everybody's inside zone, outside zone, going laterally, and so I think if you can do something that they don't see every week, it can be very helpful. So anyway, I think every coach, not every coach, but most coaches, I think Matt is one of them that will. You try to stay ahead of the curve a little bit. You're not just, because if you're doing exactly what everybody else does, if you got the best players, then you can probably win. But Nebraska doesn't have a whole bunch of 5-star recruits in the state, and so you got to work really hard. You got to develop players, and I think being somewhat innovative is helpful. And but anyway, I like what I've seen of Matt. He's working hard, and I think he has a good grasp of what he wants to do, and that's good.
So, Coach Rhule, you it's interesting. You went into Temple, you went into Baylor. Obviously, distinct cultures, distinct traditions there, and yet you found a way to sort of earn the trust of that place to allow you to do some things differently, to innovate. And I guess I'd be interested in hearing you. Obviously, we need to move forward. How do you balance coming to a place like Nebraska that has all this history? It's just sitting here with all this tradition, and yet, as Coach said, move forward, innovate, think differently. How do you balance those two?
Well, I think that I think you've said it though. When you think about what is Coach's amongst his many impacts, but what is his greatest impacts is that he was the forerunner of most of the things that we do today. My wife was the dietitian coach at Temple University. She worked with all the students, and I was just an assistant coach, and we went to her and said, hey, we want a training table, a special place to eat. And so who'd she go study? She went and studied Nebraska. And she came back and modeled a little at Temple University. We modeled a little mini Nebraska training table. Never knowing that someday we'd be living in Lincoln. My first coaching job was at Albright College. And Jeff Collins, who's been the defensive coordinator at Florida, Mississippi State, it was he and I and Sean Padden, who works downstairs for me, Division III college, and what the defense were. They all wore black shirts. They wore black jerseys because that was what college football was. You talk about strength and training and all the different things. There's just been such an impact on us by Nebraska and Nebraska football that I never thought about. If you put on film of us at Baylor, the defense was wearing a black jersey because that's just what you do if you want to be a great defense. And so I think when you think about all those different areas, all the universities, Penn State, my alma mater, all across the country, people came here to see, hey, what's the best way that it can be done? And so what's the best way to honor that? It's to obviously respect and keep up the traditions that matter, but also to have a spirit of innovation. That's the thing is when you watch, I spent a lot of time watching TV copies of those teams in the 90s, and you're going to watch a zone play, and then you're going to see a ISO, and then you're going to see an option play, and then you're going to see a one-back zone, and then you're going to see a quarterback trap, which I've never seen before, and then you're going to see a lot of different football. The football was so innovative, and it's easy to say, well, we just line up and ran the ball. There was such nuance and such detail, and you see Tommy Frazier and all those quarterbacks coach at the line calling the game like everyone's afraid to do that nowadays, but you had them up there and they're audibling and getting us in the right place. So to me, the spirit of Nebraska is that for so many years, Coach Osborne had it where they were the forerunners of everything, off the field and on the field. And so how do you respect that? You come here and you say, hey, what are the best advantages we can give our student athletes on and off the field? What are the best ways for training, for recovery? What are the best ways for equipment? What are the best things that we can do academically, life skills wise? That's in my opinion, the true tradition of Nebraska is to be the best on and off the field, and then let the scoreboard take care of itself.
100%. So I'll go to you first here on this. Everybody talks about culture, and culture's defined a lot of different ways. I felt like I had the privilege of being a player in a great culture. In a nutshell, try to explain how do you view culture? How do you build it, and how do you maintain it, and what does a good culture look like?
For me, a culture is probably a word used a lot. I always feel like culture is just kind of the sum total of everyone's actions. Like, we can have a great philosophy, we can say what we are, but what do we do? What do our actions say? And when your actions match your words, when your actions match your philosophy, you probably have a pretty good culture. And so I think the thing for me is to make sure that, A, we really clearly define the expectations, and then B, that myself as the head coach and the coaching staff, that we live that out first and foremost. Like when you talk about coach, you talk about how hard he worked. When you're talking with me, you always talk about how honest of a man he was and is. Those things had an impact on you. And so when the coaching staff and when the people that lead your football program are honest and hardworking, then you probably have a chance to have a culture that's that way. And that's not always the case in college football nowadays, but that's what we hope to be. And so I think when you are clearly define what you're looking for, when the coaches live up to it, and then you have to set standards. I mean, the men like Coach Osborne, my coach, Coach Paterno, like no one was above the team. No one was so important that they could have their own set of rules and some set of standards. And I think that's something that young people really need, standards.
You talked about gentleman coaches like Coach Paterno, Coach Osborne, and some of these. Like, from your perspective, what's been the biggest change from his generation of coaching and today's generation of coach?
You see so often in today's generation of coaching, coaches, talking bad about each other on Twitter or having press conference. Like at the end of the day, when I worked at UCLA, I used to always love to talk to Coach Wood. Anytime I had a chance, and it was only a few times, but he always referred to the coach as a teacher. And so for teachers and educators, we're teaching players about life. We're teaching them about manhood and adulthood. And I think the last thing we should do is probably start talking bad about our peers. And football's a game that in a lot of parts of the country, it's under attack sometimes. So why don't we speak highly of our peers, speak highly of the other coaches? The thing that, is not always very popular in today's society, but it's what Coach just said about Oklahoma. I always feel like as a team, you need to have great opponents to show your greatness. You guys won a lot of games, but it's the games against Miami or against Florida or against Oklahoma those are the games that allowed Nebraska to be Nebraska. And
that's
so
why people came to play here.
No doubt. So you respect your opponent, and I think that starts with the coach.
Coach, you one of the things that I heard you say that always stuck with me was this phrase, unity of purpose. In a nutshell, to you, what does unity of purpose mean?
Well, it means that everybody's going in the same direction. And, Matt mentioned John Wooden. And I got to know John because I admired him. He was a basketball coach. I was a football coach. And most coaches can tell you what they do, but a lot of coaches can't tell you why they do it. And I thought John was really good at that, explaining why he did what he did. And he never mentioned winning. And he always talked about the process. And right now you hear a lot of people talk about the process. But what he meant, the first practice he'd show them how to put socks on so they wouldn't get blisters. And that's pretty basic. Then how to bend your knees on a free throw and so on. And what he said was if you do the right things with the right intensity, with the right frequency, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you don't have to talk about winning. That takes care of it. And so I thought, well, if it makes sense to John, I'll do the same thing. So I didn't talk about winning either. We talked about the process. And so I mentioned that sometimes when things get a little difficult, that's when you really learn the most. And we had a season in '91. We ended up 9-3. And we lost our quarterback, and there were some things that happened that explained some of the 3 losses, but we just felt we needed to get better. And so we said, okay, everything's on the table. And from academics to training table to strength and conditioning, offense, defense, we evaluated everything. And I hired a guy named Jack Stark. Jack was a sports psychologist from Omaha, and now a regent. And Jack came in and he said, well, he would like to initiate something called the Unity Council. And so we said, well, okay. And so we had each position group select 2 players from their position, 2 linebackers, 2 running backs, two offensive linemen, defensive linemen, so on. So about 14 guys. And they met every Tuesday. And their charge was to bring up anything that they felt might interfere with team unity. So it might be, well, they didn't like what they had for lunch on Friday. Nobody'd come into my office and say, I didn't like what we had for lunch. Or maybe the equipment guy was grumpy and throwing towels at him, or just a lot of little irritants. And so they'd bring them up. And so on Wednesday, I'd get up. I wasn't in the meeting, but they'd take notes. And so I get up and say, okay, I'll talk to the equipment guy and settle him down, and he won't throw towels at you. And we won't have hot dogs for lunch on Friday, and we'll let you pick the movie. And so we gave them some ownership, and then we also developed a discipline policy, which everybody agreed on. And because so often, as a coach, you may, a guy does something and you may kick him off the team, and then somebody a week later does the same thing, and you run him up the steps at 6 in the morning. And you say, well, that's not fair. But what the players wouldn't realize that the guy that you dismissed had already been told one more thing. I mean, we can't keep putting up with this. And so the Unity Council began to understand who was functioning, and and so we put in a point system. And 1 point, if you missed class, you lost a point. Late for practice, 2 points, whatever else. And once you got to 3 points, you had to go in front of the Unity Council. And that was not pleasant for most players because they were pretty tough on them. And 4 points, they had to come see me, and I notified the parents. 5 points, you're not necessarily dismissed, but you didn't play anymore for a few games. And so the point was that we developed, I think, a group of people on the team that really took responsibility for what happened. And there were a lot of things I know that were addressed by players that probably I never heard about. And because they took a lot of pride in what they were doing, and we can get to that point. You really got the culture thing in pretty good hands when people have bought in enough that they feel they have ownership, that they have a stake. And so anyway, that was helpful. And so, but culture is important, and I think, as I said, I'm not here to be a cheerleader for Matt, but I like a lot of the things that he's done, and I know he's working hard, and that's where it starts. And I think his players will work hard, and my guess is that they'll, the Big Ten's a little different animal, and you kind of have to adjust to what you're seeing out there on the field. And so this is kind of a possession league where a lot of 14, 15 play drives, and you don't see the ball for 5 or 6 minutes. And pretty soon, if the other team keeps having the ball and you don't have it, pretty soon, by the fourth quarter, your defense is worn out. And that's kind of what we used to do to teams, and that's what happens a lot in the Big Ten. And so you've got to be able to match that. And you got to be able to get it away from them and then keep it yourself for a while. But every league's a little different.
Coach Rhule, I've seen you in a short time really be focused on discipline and trying to instill that accountability on your team. And one thing you said, I don't know if you said it publicly or to me, but I just remember because I liked it. You said you have to earn the right to coach them hard. And I know for you, relationships are so important. Talk a little bit about in your early tenure here and looking at this team, how do you go about building that trust with them and that relationship so you can push them and to try to create the team and culture you want?
Yeah, I think it's spending time. I know there's cell phones now and computers are everywhere and it's a digital age, but it's still, to me, everything goes back to spending time with people and I think over the years, the thing that I've learned is to talk less and listen more. I think young people today, especially after COVID, where they were in their houses for a year and a half, some places 2 years, they're dying to talk to you. They're dying to tell you what's going on inside. And so I think when you kind of know what someone really wants, or what their fears are, their hopes are, their dreams are, then you can always kind of tie it back into that. And but you have to spend time. You have to be there early in the morning. You have to be there late at night. You guys have done a great job of letting us eat with the players and be around them. Nothing brings people together more than a meal. So I think just we went to the movies last night as a team, right? Just little things like that. Seeing people in a different element. I've always been one of those coaches who will let my kids come to everything. We had a workout out here, coach, in the snow. We were pushing prowlers in the snow. It was 1 degree, and my 7-year-old daughter was out there with me, because to me, what greater gift can I give our players than to show them that, hey, I'm a father first, And so I think when they see me as human, they see the coaches as human, we have a chance to get to know each other, then we can have good conversations, and we can talk about what they really want. We can help them. We're here to help everybody have a better life. That's why we're here. We're here to help them get college degrees and get great jobs and maybe play in the NFL and win a championship while they're here. But most importantly, I want them to have a great life. And if they believe that, then they'll put up with the things that, maybe they're a little bit annoyed with sometimes, but they know it's coming from a good place.
We talk a lot about physicality and all that, but toughness. In your, when you look at a team, what are the attributes that define a tough team?
Oof. I think it's, let me say this. When I look at a team, I always look and see when they make a big play, what they do. Do they turn and celebrate with each other, or do they celebrate with the fans? And there's a mixture of both.
By the way, I want to tell you something. I remember sitting in film rooms with this man where somebody scored a touchdown, and if it was just one remote little celebration, we were reminded as he went through. See that left guard who had that great kick-out block, and the wide receiver who blocked down here? There were 7 people that were a result of you getting in the end zone. So it was not too dissimilar to what I experienced as a player.
Well, I think if you're a team that practices hard and works hard, and then you might not hang out with everybody, but you start to really appreciate everybody and respect everybody. And when you respect the guys and appreciate their work, then when something good happens, you're not doing it because you're told to. It's just joyous. You want to celebrate with them. And so that to me is always like kind of like an autopsy of your soul. Like, when things go well, what do you look like? When things don't go well, what do you look like? I think tough teams, they win on the road, they win in the elements, they come from behind. They can, like this coach said, they win the fourth quarter. They can run the ball when they have a lead and put the game away. There's so many elements to it. It's not just all about being physical. I think toughness to me is the mental and physical strength. And strength can be improved, and so we believe that toughness can be improved. And we certainly want to be a physical team, but we also want to be a disciplined team. We don't want to beat ourselves. There's nothing worse than turning the game on afterwards, and you're jumping off sides and you're dropping kicks, and that's what bad teams do, bad things. And so we want to be a mentally tough team as well as a physically tough team, and that shows up on Saturdays.
So I want to talk. I don't want to get too personal here, Coach, but I do want to talk a little bit about being the head coach at a place like the University of Nebraska is different than some places. This can be a difficult place to be a head coach in football. From your estimation, Coach, what are some of the things that were really hard to be a head coach here that maybe the average fan just doesn't understand that makes it challenging?
Well, there really isn't an off season. If you're a major metropolitan area, there's a pro team there, and once the season's over, the sports writers turn to something else. And here in Nebraska, there usually in most every edition of the newspaper, there's going to be something about football, and so the scrutiny. Pretty much 365 days a year, but with that, there's another side that's a good thing, because I remember going in the stadium last fall, and I think we were 3-8 or something like that, and and everybody was here. And there's very, very few places in the country where you'd be 3-8 and every seat was full. And so with the scrutiny comes the fact that people care, and they're going to show that they care. And I think Nebraska fans are pretty knowledgeable by and large. I mean, it's usually a pretty well-informed group, and they usually treat opponents well, which is again kind of unusual. And so it's a good environment to coach in. And but I guess I'd rather have people care and have a little extra attention than vice versa.
Matt, you haven't had the chance to experience game day yet. I know the spring game's not far away, but in your interactions, we talk about our fan base a lot. We talk about, as Coach just said, the support can be a little bit overwhelming at times, but what have you seen from the fan base, and how does it differentiate previous experiences?
Well, I've never seen anything like it. Let me say that, as at least as a head coach. You know, I've never been privileged to play in this type of a game day environment, and I think the biggest thing is, you know, at least on game day, how much it can impact the opponent. You know, I mean, you know, just the crowd noise and third down and snap counts and all the things that happen nowadays. You know, just how exciting that'll be to be a part of it. You know, I took my family to whatever it was, the Maryland basketball game, and afterwards I took the girls to get ice cream downtown, and stopped and talked. A couple fans were talking to me, and they were getting ready to drive home. They were going to drive 4.5 hours home, and they came for a basketball game, and it was humbling, and at the same time a great reminder that there's people all over the state that care deeply about what we do. And so, you know, when the alarm goes off in the morning, and you know we got morning workouts at 6 o'clock in the morning, you don't feel like getting up. Maybe one day, just reminding yourself that there's a lot of people who do care, as Coach said, and you know, you can't promise the results, but you can certainly promise the work. You know, you can't promise how the season will end up, but you can certainly promise that your process will be right, and you'll try to do right by everybody. And I think that's been great. I think, you know, people, like I said, they care, but they're such kind people. You know, I mean, you know, I've had all ends of it. You know, I've been Coach of the Year and I've been fired. I've been through all of it, Coach. And so I don't worry about me. I always worry about my kids. That's what I worry about. And I wanted to come to a place that would be kind to my kids. That would understand, like they didn't choose to have their dad be at this high profile of a job, and there's a lot of fun parts to it. But you know what? We'll have good days and bad days, and the key to me is to make sure that I went somewhere that treats people well. And I knew the minute I got to Nebraska, I knew that I'd found the right people to do this with.
There's one piece of advice you could give Matt. What would you tell Coach Rhule? And if you have more than one piece, which I know you probably will, you can say all of them.
Yeah, well, there's nothing worse than some guy that hadn't coached in 22 years sitting here and pretending like he has all the answers, and I don't. And you know, Matt has rebuilt programs at Temple and at Baylor, and been in the NFL. There's a lot of coaches been in the NFL. It's a different deal, you know. And so he's certainly had a good background, and I haven't seen anything that I wouldn't think would be pretty much online of what you ought to do. You know, he's worked hard, recruits hard, and the other thing that they've tried to do is establish good relations in the state. And you know, we were out every Friday night, and we were in every high school. And you don't want to just show up in high school when somebody has a great player. You want to be there every year. And I think some of that's been missing in recent years.
I remember what my recruiting pitch from Coach Osborne was. We were shocked that Nebraska would actually recruit me. I don't know if you remember, my dad, my family did not come from a long lineage of athletes. So I think my brother and I were the first one to ever play sports. And when John Melton, the late great John Melton, came to Cedar Falls and told my parents that he, would like to offer me a scholarship, my dad didn't really believe him and thought he was, just selling something. And he actually, I think he called down to your office and said, you know, if Nebraska's really serious about my son, wouldn't that Tom Osborne come see us? Mm-hmm. And I think you were piloting yourself in those days. And so 2 days later, here comes Coach Osborne, flies into Cedar Falls, and it became real. It wasn't just a joke. They actually were interested in recruiting me, but I can't remember what your recruiting pitch was. What was your go-to to get guys to commit?
Oh, I don't know. Everybody's different. I try it. What Matt said, I think listening is kind of a lost art, and I think it's important to sit and listen and try to hear where people are coming from. And I think probably the basic pitch here was not any promise of playing time. We never said, well, you're going to come in and start for us, because that's going to backfire on you if it doesn't happen. And I think we tried to make sure parents came to the campus, because they knew that there was going to be good academic backing, and that things would be pretty solid, and there wasn't a lot of smoke and mirrors, and so I think that appealed to a lot of parents, and and I think it fits well with the state of Nebraska as well.
Well, it sure fit well with my parents, who were pretty authentic, genuine people. And when you said you didn't promise anything, I had it for a long time until it got a little bit wet. But I had your business card. You probably don't remember this, but you on the back of it wrote down, and it was in green ink for some reason. I'll never forget that. And you wrote the right outside or linebacker depth chart, and there were literally 6 guys. And so there were no guarantees, no promises. You guaranteed me the opportunity to come in and compete for playing time. That was your guarantee.
I guarantee you'd be one of the 6.
And so, but you're right. My mom and dad had a chance to come down, and growing up in Iowa, we were Iowa Hawkeye fans, and so it was very quiet in the car. Heading down 80 back towards Iowa for the first 25, 30 minutes. But my dad broke the silence and said, son, after being at the University of Nebraska and meeting Tom Osborne, we could understand why you would want to go play for Nebraska. And so it was that genuine, authentic man that ultimately led. So what about your recruiting? I mean, you guys came in here, you put together an amazing staff full of hardworking people. You've got a great alignment in terms of unity, and you had to put a recruiting class together fast, and you had a great recruiting class. What did you find that helped you guys lead to that? I know it's hard work and all, and the place, but what's your approach to recruiting in terms of trying to get young men to a place like Nebraska?
I hope it's not all that different than Coach. I think we try to spend a lot of time talking about two things, probably our process, how we'll do it, and then our vision for each kid. I have a son who's 18. He's going to go look and see where he's going to go to college, and I want him to go some place where he can see himself being successful. And so I think for us it's about talking about, hey, if you come here, here's what you can expect, and having that be real. And then this is what we see in you. I think all of us want our kids to go somewhere where people see what they can do, not what they can't do. And when you hear that, you hope that it resonates with people. And then I think as much as anything, it's a feel. Today's society is not built on trust really as much as it once was. And so when they come with our staff, I've got 13 or 14 former players working for me in some way, recruiting in the weight room. And to me, they're my greatest resume. They are why hopefully someone will want to come here and play when they meet Terrence, when they meet Coop, when they meet those guys and say, okay, he played for me, this is what I can expect, and it's real. And so I think people are searching for authenticity, they're searching for transparency, and it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to show these guys and say, hey, they can tell you the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it's going to be like. And I think, what we found was a lot of people here, it made sense to them, it resonated with them. They didn't want a lot of pretension. They didn't want a lot of smoke and mirrors, as Coach said. They just wanted straightforward, honest, transparent, people they felt good about, and a good plan.
Last question, Coach. I'll ask both of you about this in terms of recruiting philosophy. I remember years ago you talking about recruiting off a list versus actually identifying talent. I think you and your staff, first of all, you didn't care about what rankings were. You did the work. You identified players, and if they were a 1-star, I don't even know if they had stars back then, but you went out and found people that fit your culture, your style. How do you become a great talent evaluator, or how do you develop that skill that you can find those players that turn into all-conference players that maybe other people don't see?
Well, I think one thing is athletic ability. You can see that on the film, and but you can't always evaluate character, work ethic, and so that's why listening. Sometimes if a player, I was sitting in a living room and a young guy was disrespectful to his parents. I wouldn't say, well, we're not going to recruit him, but that would be a red flag, because you knew that this guy was going to be a little bit difficult from an authority standpoint, and so those kind of things, and you try to make sure you've talked to as many people as you can, not just the high school coach, and he's certainly a very good judge, but also he's going to try to sell his players, and so if you can talk to the English teacher, family, friends, some other people, just know a little bit more about him. I think that's important, and but I really didn't. I don't think I'd pay much attention to the stars today, because we had a lot of guys, I'm sure, that would be 2 stars or 3 stars that turned out to be All-American players. And but I would say this too: we would occasionally find a player that hardly anybody else was recruiting. But I think now with all the recruiting services and videos and all those kind of things, those kinds of people are a little bit rarer, although I'm sure there are still a few out there. But the big thing is you see a guy that's 17, and what's he going to look like when he's 19 or 20? And some of them have a lot of growth potential, and some are about as good as they're going to get physically. And so you try to estimate those things too. But it's kind of an inexact science, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. And one thing, I just along with what Matt was saying about listening, I've thought about it a lot, and I think maybe the most important part of my day was when we were stretching for practice, that I could walk around and talk to 4 or 5 players, and it wouldn't be them being called into my office, and it would be about them, test they had coming up, how their dad was, what their high school team was doing. And the same thing in the weight room. I'd go in the weight room, and you could see from looking at me, didn't take, but I'd walk around and I'd lift a couple weights, but in the course of 30 minutes, I'd talk to 4 or 5 guys, and so in the course of a season, you'd have a chance to interact with everybody 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and I think that was certainly an important part of it.
Mm-hmm. So how do you, as a quote, more modern day coach, the proliferation of all of these websites and Twitter and all this stuff and recruiting services, how do you find it, Coach? I've seen it interesting. You've offered scholarships to young men that didn't have any recruiting ranking. I mean, you seem to be a little bit more old school in that sense, where you're not recruiting off the list, but you're out trying to look for diamonds in the rough too. Where did that sort of thinking come from for you?
I think when I was at Baylor, I remember we were recruiting a corner, and he went to Texas. And I remember saying, I have to beat Texas, but I'm not going to beat them in recruiting very often. So we went out and we found, I said, well, let's just go find the biggest, fastest kids who love football and are good kids. Like, I think what Coach said, like, it's so much more direct now recruiting. The days when I first started recruiting, you called the house phone, talked to mom put so-and-so on the phone. Now it's like, the kid texts you, he calls you, it's so direct. So you pretty soon figure out, hey, do I really like spending time and talking to this kid or not? And if you do, then great, he's probably going to be a good fit. So, but we started taking guys like Kalen Barnes and JT Woods, and they were big and fast and came from really good families and were good kids. And we just said, you know what, we're going to practice really hard. We're going to hire really good coaches, really good strength staff, have them eat really well. And you know what, they might come in as a 2-star recruit, but they'll leave as a draft pick. And that worked. And so even when you come to a place like Nebraska where you can recruit the very best of the best, I think you still have to train your eye and trust your eye. Is this young man a good fit for us in our system? Is he a good fit for us athletically? Is he a good fit for us character-wise, football-wise, all those things? And as Coach said, not having a lot of frills, not a lot of smoke and mirrors in recruiting. If and we're going to have fun, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be based on something real, because I want people that are going to be attracted to that, because if they're attracted to it, they'll be a good fit for us. If they're coming for something that's not really here, they're never going to be happy. But I think it's really just trusting yourself. As Coach said, nowadays we can get down the computer and pull up someone in Hawaii, then someone in Washington, D.C. You have the ability to see all these guys, but most people just kind of trust the list or trust some third party, and we're going to trust ourselves first. We'll take all the information we can get, but trust ourselves.
Well, that's awesome. I want to thank both of you. First of all, Coach, I want to thank you for taking the time. Thank you. I say this to you a lot, but I want to thank you again for all you did for me and the investment that you made in all of us players.
I'd say you carried your end of the deal.
well, I learned a lot from you, and I'm still.
He was probably just Matt. You probably never saw him play, or maybe you did. But Trev had he was really quick off the ball. He was an excellent pass rusher and probably the best we had. And we had some good ones. So, yeah.
Well, learned a lot from you, Coach. Continue to learn a lot. Appreciate all of your support, and it means a lot to me. So thanks for being here, Coach. 255. Is that how many you won? You got a few to go, but we believe in you.
I'm just getting the first one. I just get one.
I guarantee you I didn't win any of them because I wasn't out there blocking and tackling. But we had good players, and that helped,
Yeah. Well, blessed to have both of you here. Thanks for what you do for the Big Red, and we're just grateful for you and Julie and your family, and looking forward to a great season. Mm-hmm. Go Big Red.
Yeah. And good luck, Matt.
Thank you, Coach.